already, this is a couple cool different slides here, programming for different distances. Sprint and Olympic distance, they require a lot of speed and power, and that's based off of your max strength. What you're going to need here is great power positions because posture is key in order to develop that power. You're going to be needing to work on some more breath control things, think swimming, breathe 3 times on the way down, breathe every 15 strokes, those kind of things, just because you're going to be working a lot closer to lactate threshold. And again, if you only have 10 hours to train, then we can only go to those 10 hours. After that, we have to manipulate what we're doing outside of that. Speed and power, they are really, really important during these distances, but it shouldn't be your sole focus here. Again, you can't only focus on speed and power because the other areas are going to get affected by that, and you don't want to solely focus on speed and power because, again, it's very similar to if you only stay in that hypertrophy phase of training. You can only do so much work there before you get a breakdown, before the quality of things breaks down. So that is super key here. You will do a lot, but you cannot do it every time. Half iron distance, that's 70.3. Speed, endurance is much more important here. You're going to have a little bit lower powers. This is kind of the crossover area because you're going to have lower powers for longer periods, but you're kind of right on the edge of that max strength and power that you were before, but also endurance. So it's a little game here for this half iron distance. Postural endurance becomes a little bit more important because you're holding those positions for longer periods of time. A lot more technique starts to come into play here just because the chances of a breakdown is going to have much more impact over the amount of a half Ironman versus a sprint and then Olympic and then a half iron. You could kind of get away with some of those postural imbalances of a sprint just because the amount of time isn't long. But take that same athlete and move them to a half iron distance, then they start to struggle if those postural techniques or endurance isn't up to par just because they break down, and some of those leaks, they start to magnify themselves over the amount of that race. So say they're losing 5 seconds a mile on their run. Yeah, that might not affect them on the sprint, but 5 seconds a mile over the course of that half iron distance is going to add up big time, and it might even lead to more later on depending on how they can go. Pushing from the Olympic to half distance isn't that tough because you already have, hopefully, the power and speed built into your body, your system, and your training plan. It becomes a little bit harder to do the inverse of that because you don't have that speed and power coming from the half or full side, and it's a lot more difficult to obtain that strength, power, speed after you've done a lot of full distance, half distance, just because the demands are very different. So you essentially have to retrain yourself again, and a lot of times this takes a couple of years to do, if not more. And a lot of times you see the athletes go from being specialists in the sprint and they move up to the Olympic distance. Then after a couple years from there, they move to the half and then they move to the full. It's very rare that you'll see a full distance athlete move from the half to the Olympic to the sprint and have that increased success. So I know it's a super popular thing to do, to go ahead and chase that full, and that's great. But if you do that for years and years and years and years, and then you say, okay, I want to have the same success that I have at the half iron or iron distance at the sprint or Olympic distance, it's probably not going to come right out of the gate. Okay. And when you do make that switch from the half or full to that sprint or Olympic, it's going to take a couple of years. And if you stick with it for those couple of years and then decide, okay, I want to go to that full again, you're going to have to change again. It's going to come back a little bit easier, but you're going to have to work on some of those endurance and postural endurance areas for those longer distances, just because you were hyper focused on the sprint and Olympic, and that, again, super focused on the power and speed. A little bit of a tangent there, but just keep that in mind when you're going from flip-flopping from distance to distance to distance. If you're going half iron or iron distance every year and you're really crushing it, and then next year you go to an Olympic, and then the next year you go to a full, and you keep flip-flopping and flip-flopping, you might want to think about targeting one distance and then changing from there. So just keeping that in mind. Full distance, again, this is the ultimate strength endurance event. Okay, you're going to have probably your lowest powers over the course of these 5 different events. Postural endurance is key, and durability against injury is also key. Again, a lot of athletes, they focus on that half iron distance, and they have a lot of great success. And then they move over to the full distance, and it's okay to target a full distance 1 year, and say you get a couple of injuries that prevent you from doing that full, or it becomes not a good idea to chase that full anymore. It's not a bad idea to pivot back to that half, but just trying to chase that full target, even though you're not going to do it, or even say, okay, I know I really want to do a full. I'm going to really focus on that in 2 years. And the first year here, I'm going to increase my training. I'm going to still only race 70.3s, but I'm going to start to increase my training to a point of a full distance training load. And what that's going to do is going to allow your body to get that durability, which is arguably the most important thing in triathlon, long distance endurance, anything. Okay. And forcing your body to do that full in that first year, you could get away with it, but I would argue that it would be much more beneficial to you to have an increased training load than you did in previous years. Maybe you do a 3/4 to that full, right? And then the next year you go, your body isn't totally hit out of the blue from this increased training load. A lot of times you see this from the professional riders. They're crushing the U23, U25 circuits, then they go become a professional, and they really don't do anything for that first year. That second year, they then explode. And you see a lot of great results, but that first transition year, a lot of times their directors, they're really, they want their athletes to succeed, but they know that in-between year is so critical to an athlete's development. And if you rush that, and if you go from 1 year racing 70.3s, and the next year you're racing fulls, 2 or 3 of them, you're going to hamper your ability to recover. You're going to also hamper your development as an athlete. And I highly, highly recommend having a gap here in between the two, just to allow you the ability to gain that durability.